All right, I got my guy, Rod Francis, coach, educator, and creator for over a decade. He was my human potential coach who helped me become a coach back almost a decade ago. And he is on a mission to empower not only others, but organizations to be better leaders and better humans. Rod, welcome to the show, brother.
Well, thanks very much, Joel. I'm really delighted, and I'm also excited about what we're going to be covering here. You know, how what we're going to explore about and what grows out of that conversation together.
Yeah, it's been just, I reached out to you recently just really to pay you some gratitude. I was telling you how I kind of went through a crisis period over the last 2 to 3 years, losing my job, then fighting marital issues and losing connection with my two young boys. And what I wanted to tell you was thank you, because I had gone back when I started fixing my marriage and fixing my relationship with my boys. One of the big things I came back to was presence. I kept finding this thing about presence over and over again. And the first time I ever heard about presence, you had taught me 10 years ago in the coaching program. And it was funny because it was new at the time to like talk about this thing called presence and meditation and mindfulness. At that same time, I believe Andy Puddicombe, the guy who created Headspace and mindfulness, it was all the rage. So it was just kind of starting to come up. Now we hear a lot of people talking about it. But what I realized is that even back then I was just learning the idea of presence, and I had glimpses and moments of it where I was being present, but I don't think I really embodied it. Maybe I had a good week or something, but all the practices I had learned, it's funny, I came back to the basics. I came back to the fundamentals of what I had learned from you. And that really was a gateway that transcended not only my family, my marriage, but my relationship with my boys and my family. And it really helped. It was one of the key things that helped transform my relationship. And the word transform, I think about this a lot now. Wayne Dyer talks about this, but to transform, form is the body and trans is like to go beyond. And so I had to go beyond just the body. I had to like really transcend, and it was pivotal. So I wanted to thank you. And you've been doing this for over 40 years, I think, right? So you know it better than anybody. And that's why I'm excited to have you on, man. Before we just jump into all the tactical things and all the good stuff that you're doing right now, talk about just, you have such an eclectic career with the performing arts and modeling and all this stuff before you became such a guru, a high level coach, if you will, designing other people's programs and helping them create change in organizations. Like talk about that and how that actually eventually influenced the way you coach today.
Yeah, well, thanks. Thank you for the appreciation. It's when one's out in the world in the way, I know it's certainly how I am, and some of my colleagues also say the same, that, you know, we do what we do because we really, you know, we're not doing it just for a gig to get a paycheck. You know, we're doing it because we really want to help people grow. And when people come back and offer that appreciation about, you know, what that meant for them, it's extremely meaningful and touching for me personally. But just to circle now to your question about, it's always funny to reflect back, you know, and there's, you know, there's a few decades now to reflect back along. But I guess that whole thing into performing arts was back, you know, I was in, you know, I'm definitely a boomer. You know, I grew up in the 1960s. My parents were real working class, made good in Australia. And they sent I had two other brothers, and we all got sent to this private school, you know, and this private school was kind of a real good school. And it was basically educating young men to go into business. You know, it was trying to get people set up for that or some kind of thing like that. And I just felt like a misfit there. You know, it's not as though I wasn't academically capable. Something just didn't fit with me. And so it just, you know, I ended up leaving school, which was really interesting. I left before high school diploma. So wow. I actually, I just had enough, you know. So I kind of left, and I floated a bit, probably caused my parents a lot of concern, and but I happened to be dating someone whose father was their parents were academics. And they had all this sort of circle of people who who did all these incredible careers. Like her father was a philosopher, and I never met people like that, and it was this opened my mind, to, okay, there are other things, other ways of doing things. Some of them might be academic. And through them, I met someone who was a dancer.
Rod, how old were you, by the way?
I was about 17.
Yeah. Okay.
So I was kind of a little older by then, for doing that. And it just, something caught in me on that. And I got it in my mind. So actually, I want to do something with that. I want to go and do performing arts. And so I kind of made some money, and I was in Brisbane. I moved down to Sydney with it in my mind. I initially thought I was going to go to, the national. I was going to go for the NIDA, the National Institute of Dramatic Art. I was going to kind of build myself up as an actor, and something happened, and I ended up doing a lot of dance classes, and I found out I was really good at this, and I ended up in the Australian Ballet School in 2 years. I got accepted into there, and then that set off like about a 12-year career. I was traveling the world. I was pair of ballet shoes, and I did all sorts of things. I wasn't just classical ballet, but I did a lot of modern dance, and I wasn't a huge star. I did some principal roles and solo stuff, and but I, always in a gig, always had work, and then when I was in my early 30s, I think, I must have just been in my early 30s, and I was dating someone at the time, and they were working for a model agency, and they said, why don't you just give us some photographs, and we'll see if we get. And I kind of like, dancers are poor, man. Like performing arts, you got nothing. Like you. And it was great. It was beautiful. It was a fantastic thing to do, and this it just so happened that this very famous photographer happened to blow into town, and they were shooting a whole lot of Vogue and a whole lot of GQ and all that kind of stuff, and they really liked me, and they took these photographs, and then next minute, they came out and the phone was blowing up, and the agency were going, we got Milan on the phone, we got Paris on the phone, we got Tokyo. Can you be in Tokyo next Wednesday? And suddenly, my life changed. It just, and I, I was sort of thinking I had this career of dance, and I was choreographing and really getting into that side of my career by then. And then this thing came, and I thought, that's only going to be one time that's ever going to happen in your life. That's one chance to get on the ride, if you want to take that ride.
Yeah.
And I did,
But that was it. Like, you had it. I'm thinking, like, by now you're GQ, you're on Vogue. Like, that's got to be a big deal as a guy in his early 20s, traveling the world, being on magazines. Like, that's got to be a big thing. And for most people, I would assume, like, look at me, I'm doing all these things. I'm going to keep doing it and see where I become more famous, achieve more magazines, achieve more. But clearly there was a chance where you pivoted. You didn't do any of that. So yeah, what was going on during that time, or what caused you to pivot and not become the mega GQ star that you know today? Instead, I know of you as Rod Francis, the mindfulness teacher and high level coach.
Well, a lot of things happened in there. One is I was actually in my early 30s by then, so I was even older. Like, a lot of the people were much younger than me. But for some reason, that was the kind of thing that really got me. I remember showing up in Milan, and suddenly I was like in 30 pages of Men's Vogue over there or something like that. It was, but the thing to bear in mind, like, I had this really successful. I lived in Paris, lived in Milan for a while, lived in New York. I traveled a lot. It was a lot of fun. It's the fashion industry. In those days, it wasn't like most male models. They don't have the longevity. There's a few who do, but not that many. And fashion industry is all about that. It's fashion. You're in and you're out. So
that was something that you knew. Like, this is not a long time thing,
I didn't know that, actually, because my agents were all kind of going, "Oh my God, you're going to work forever. You'll be like," and then actually what happened was that was all at the time when that sort of heroin chic came in, and all of a sudden, it was like, people who looked about 14 years old, and I was in my 30s, so I just wasn't at the top of the list, and you had to be quite prosaic about it and accept it. And, by then I was living in Europe, and I'd really got into music culture, and I was starting to program music. I was very into digital music at that point. And But other things kind of happened. I got a little too curious about the nightclub culture, and I ended up with a few problems out of
Yeah.
all of that. I ended up with substance problems. Like pretty interesting things happening for me around that, and I'm quite happy to I don't want to go into any great detail about it, but I think I say you said you were looking at my site, and one thing I say in there is it's some people don't ever come out of that.
Yeah.
Some people that's their road downhill and out of life, and for me, I was lucky. I found a way of recovering. I reached out. I had really good support, and that really started something different in my life. It gave me a very fresh view, a way of resetting my life. I'd gone back to college for a little bit. So after not finishing my high school diploma, I went to college. And then I thought, at that point of my life, I thought, well, I don't want to cut, getting a college degree, I'm going to be competing with 20-year-olds coming out of college at the same time. I want to do something different. So I decided to set up a business, and I'd met someone. I was getting married in London. They were an interior designer. And so we set up a design-based business in London, and that went nuts. It actually, we were in national magazines. We had all this kind of stuff happening. We had tons of work, and we end up with these, saying, when I often sort of write about this, I say, after about 6 or 7 years, it was a very interesting business because I was very green at business. I learned a lot through it, but we were high cost, low margin. And what it meant was there wasn't a lot of fat in there. So what it meant was that we were working pretty hard. And when you looked at the receipts at the end, once everything had been done, there just wasn't that much in it. And I got this point after about 7 years or so. I just thought, is this what I really want to be doing for the rest of my life? Is this really where, you could just see that's how the days were going to play out. And I kind of thought, how did I end up in this anyway? I always did creative stuff.
Yeah.
So that's where it started something very different for me. I went and got some coaching. I started doing a lot of different programs. I got really back into all my practices, my Buddhist practice. I really reignited a lot of that and thought, I'm just going to look at me for a little bit and just really try and find out, what do I really want to do? And that's how I ended up. That path just took me into coaching. Very quickly, I was asked if I would come and work on programs. I discovered this latent skill of being able to create and develop programs, that I just hadn't realized was really there. And then it's just led me to where I am now. I've been, running coach training programs in Europe and here for about 12, 14 years now. And really feeling fulfillment in my life. As difficult as the days can still be sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's the story.
I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned this on your site and you even just talked about it now, about achieving all this success. And we see a lot of high achievers, and myself, anybody, look at any of them, or just actors and stuff, and they achieve all this success, but they still feel empty.
Oh, yeah.
And unfortunately, you've seen people like, who's the actor that played Mrs. Doubtfire? He's escaping my mind, but
Robin Williams, is it?
Robin Williams, thank you. Another guy had all this success, amazing. Look at his life; he's so great. He committed suicide. So there had to be some emptiness there, and he made millions of people laugh. And even just hearing your story, I know a lot of people, they're going through transitions. The pandemic was a great time. I think that shook everybody up and forced us all to say, hey, is this really what I want? And now here you are, having gone on this, amazing career of modeling and performing arts. You're doing all this stuff. And then you come back and it's like, well, that really wasn't the answer. Now you're in your 30s. And you've got to make this transition. And it's like, people are probably, there's all this pressure from the outside of like, hey man, are you going to grow up and get a real job? When are you going to settle down? Right? Everyone, and you feel that pressure. And it's so interesting because you said, I had to take a moment and sit back and say, what do I really want?
Yeah.
And I've done that several times. And
Mm-hmm.
it's the scariest thing in the world to
Mm-hmm.
do, because there's that moment of just emptiness and I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, oh shit, feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary when you don't know what to do next.
Yep.
And you have to look inward. And a lot of times looking inward hurts because the truth is there. So I'm wondering, like, what was the self-talk for you? Or is there anything now, maybe even looking back, that you did that you could give other people advice when they're going through these transitions? Or was there just something that you did that helped you stay present and go, hey, it's okay, I don't have it all figured out right now,
Mm.
but I'm going to do it. I will get it there.
Mm. Yeah, it's such great great kind of question embodied in all of this, Joel. And it is true, isn't it? You know, we so often can set off on these journeys because it's the right thing to do. And at that point in my life, it was the right thing to do. And even before I got out of the, just put the brakes on and got out of the whole show, I was talking to the bank. They wanted to lend me more money. I had these people who wanted me to come in and be business partners. They were like I talked to my accountant, my CPA, and they'd say, oh, okay, you're not making a lot of money. It's great business. You got to stay with, so even then everyone's saying, no, this is the way to go. But inside, no. I absolutely remember the day where I was driving across. We had these projects on, and I was driving across London, and I was stopped at a set of lights, and I just remember looking up, and I could see my own eyes. I just looked at myself in the rear vision mirror. I hadn't intended to, but there was something about just that moment, and I looked at myself, and I could see the whole thing. I could see the forward, the whole where I was, the big question. So to now track on what you're actually asking about, I think the things to do, well, the first thing to me was really to stop. I mean, if you can, of course, some we have financial needs and all those kind of things, but actually that old truism, if you're in a hole, don't keep digging. You've got to stop. You've got to kind of take a breath and a moment. And even if you can't stop for long, go away for a week. Like you and I were talking about these sort of rites of passage things and wilderness work. And I did some of that as well. I went away, did 4 days solo up in the Banff National Park. It was facilitated, but I went on silent retreats, but probably, rather than just sitting and looking at myself, my own mind, I knew I needed more than just me trying to solve those problems. I had to sort of find out who I was and what I was really about. But we also need support, don't we? I needed a great coach. I needed really good mentor voices, that I could reach out to and I could talk to who would, even if they weren't telling me what to do, but they were asking me the kind of questions that no one else would ask me.
Yeah. Wow. That's really key. And this is something I've been talking about with a lot of guys in my men's group is when you're going through crisis, the normal thing to do is to isolate, go away, get away from your tribe, push all the good people away. And I got to figure this out myself. And that's the worst thing you can do. I found out. I'm like, guys, right now, you need to do the opposite. You need to double down on self-care. If you feel like you need a massage or something, go do it. Because that's actually going to give you the space to actually be able to create and do the things that you actually need to do. It seems counterintuitive. You want to cut away from everything. Usually you want to break free. Oh, I need to cut down and hunker. I'm getting a divorce. I need to hunker down and, I need to tighten up my finances. Actually, I'd say you probably don't. That's when you need to go out and invest in more coaching and be around a community and people that can support you and actually get you through the challenges and give you the new beliefs that you actually need, because the beliefs that got you here are not going to be the beliefs that are going to get you out of there. You're just going to stay stuck. And so it's really counterintuitive, but it's so necessary. And I see a lot of people, unfortunately, they stay stuck because they don't realize it's the opposite. You need to reach out for a coach like you did. Hire a coach, be around family, community, people that can actually get you through these things instead of the opposite.
Yeah. And you need to find wise voices, don't you? Like that's the thing. I'm really reminded, just as I'm hearing you talk about it, because we've touched on the rites of passage thing, there's that classic thing, part of the classic journey that Joseph Campbell spoke about called the hero's journey. and you sense something's going on, and one of the first things you do is you reach out to the wise voices. You find a Yoda, like, and you still got to do the journey. You still got to go into all the tough stuff, but you have to have those, to ask you those questions, to hold up a mirror, to point to things even when they're uncomfortable. It's really profound act of courage to do that. And that's what we do as coaches, right? It's what you're doing in this podcast in some ways, but is by showing other stories that will probably connect with people because it's talking about their own stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about the rites of passage thing, but let's hold down on that just for a second, because I really want to come back to mindfulness first. And you've been doing, mindfulness and meditation practice for, over 40 years. And again, 10 years ago is really the first time I ever heard of mindfulness. And I started incorporating in my life as a police officer. And it actually started to have just profound effects, because I'm not saying I still don't have the racy mind. I think we all do. And I don't cultivate it still enough. But it was the first time I ever heard of it. And it really transformed the way I acted out in the field. And people noticed the difference. And again, going through my own crisis, I came back to presence, a lot of mindfulness, calming, and just sitting in the present state. But talk to me about, if anybody's listening, we know mindfulness is all the buzz, meditation, mindfulness. They hear this from every podcast and every influencer. But what would you say, like, guys, this isn't a shiny object syndrome, or you need to go do more of this. Why do you feel like this is actually the crux of part of the practice?
Yeah, well, I'm going to start first of all. When you use that image of the racy mind and so forth, and we this is often what we come to with the practices, and we can often think when that's going on, I'm not very mindful, or I'm just away with it. But mindfulness practice, for example, doesn't guarantee that we won't have a racy mind. But what it trains us to do is to be with the racy mind in a way that isn't racy, if that makes sense. It's just to be aware of it. We develop these more expanded capacities to know what's happening to us, and then not be just in it, and not completely disassociated from it, but also not just to be compelled to take actions because of something that goes on in our mind, or some kind of reactive experience we have that's going on. So, I'm really, my practice, I did start meditating about 40 years ago, and I was taught by some yoga teacher friends I had a long time ago, and started practicing. And my practice really evolved after I went through my kind of substance problems. Things really, like at that point, I really wanted to step it up. I remember some mentor voices then said, well, why don't you go and explore the Buddhists? They really know a lot about meditation and mindfulness. Oh, yeah, that's good. And so I started setting retreats and going to have been working with a Buddhist teacher for a long time. And it's so what I think it's wonderful that mindfulness is so we have this word mindfulness that's so public, so well known. There are lots of critiques in either side around it, and I'm sure everybody knows that. We hear these things of mindfulness and so forth, and I don't want to be disparaging about it. I think it's what's developing people's interests is always a good thing. What I've been doing, actually, I've been writing a research paper about one other area, and one of the things was touching on it actually was about presence and mindfulness, and that because people sort of talk about those as really different things, and so what is this? What's going on in here? And so my take at the moment on all of this is bound up in this, and that's that the modern word mindfulness that we use in English was sort of attributed to the translators in the late 19th century, English translators who'd come across Buddhist practices in the East, and they came across these practices and they wanted to find a word for it. And the word that was used in the ancient canons, it's a language called Pali, it's an ancient Northern Indian language, is sati.
Mm.
And so they translate it into mindfulness. And then mindfulness, as it's come into the West and everything, it's sort of become this a way of talking about just a faculty of being present. Just present moment awareness. There may be some spaciousness in the mind and those kind of things. And what a lot of commentators, particularly sort of Buddhist scholars, later Buddhist scholars, have said is, well, it's okay, but it's a very, very narrow version of what sati means. Sati has much greater richness to it. It has a deeply ethical component. It means that we understand, we have a mindset, a mind frame that understands the sort of the goodness of the heart, and that this is about caring for every living being, and to practice in that way. And it's very important. If you want a steady mind, you can't be an idiot and out there, creating mayhem, because your mind's not going to be very steady. So, there's this deep interrelationship with so much else, which I think, and I could talk about many of these other things. It's actually mindfulness is in the sati is part of the intrinsic part of the whole Buddhist path to out of suffering.
Mm.
To liberation, meant, psychic liberation and a liberation from this life. So, it's kind of a big thing when you start talking about it. It's not just, taking a couple of breaths and being still, it's part of it.
Yeah.
But there's a big piece in here that's embodied. I actually think, someone I did some training with, a guy called John Kabat-Zinn, who I'm sure many of your listeners will know. I think John speaks about this very beautifully. Really beautifully about the sort of the real depths of what's implied in there.
Yeah. I only know him because you were the first person to speak about him when I first learning about mindfulness. And that was the first time I picked up one of his big books and started learning about that. Cause he's like one of the, I'd say, prominent teachers right now.
He is,
who has really
in the West.
brought and done a good job of explaining it. So interesting too. Like, I love that you said that, mindfulness is not just 10 minutes a day on your Headspace app. It's really an ethos. It's a culture.
Yeah.
It's how you embody and live. You don't get to just, and listen, wherever people are starting, I'm not judging them. If you start off and you do 10 minutes a day to create mindfulness, good for you. But really learning from you just right now, it's more than just a 10-minute a day checkout. It'll lead you to a whole way of living, and it's the culture of mindfulness. And that's a real paradigm shift. So that made me really think differently about, how do you create that culture, that paradigm in your family, where you work, wherever. It's more than just a 10-minute checkout a day. You can do your little hacks. You can write down your to-do list of being mindful, but are you really bringing that mindfulness ethos to your everyday moments of life? And that is the challenge, as you know.
Well, the practices of mindfulness, the formal practices that you're pointing to, are really important, because what they do is they rewire our neural networks, in very, very important ways. And they sort of potentiate, they make possible, this more stable, steady, kind, open-hearted, compassionate, that comes into life. But yes, mindfulness practice is about something that happens in our whole world, in our day-to-day lives. It's about the ways in which we show up within the whole world. The most ancient instruction manual for mindfulness practices and the cultivation, development, and practice of mindfulness, more than 2,600 years old, is really, really key. That it talks about, you practice mindfulness internally and externally. You practice it in the world as well.
On the note of presence, because everybody, and this ties into the mindfulness piece, everybody, we know we need to be more present. Right now, we are all, including myself, addicted to our phones. These things are just destroying us, and they are making us lack of presence. We are playing with our kids, but our phone is right nearby. Bing, hold on, I got to do this. I got to do a post or whatever we have to do. And so I think that's a big concern on everyone's mind. And I'm wondering what you would say is, what's just one small tactical, practical tip if someone's trying to cultivate mindfulness in their life, or I'm sorry, presence. If someone wants to cultivate presence in their life, what's just a simple practical tip? And one thing I wanted to ask you too, and kind of, I know I do this a lot. I'll ask a question, then keep talking, but I'll come back to that. And I was just thinking though, because like I said, the practices I learned in the Human Potential Institute and just everything that you had taught me was huge. And even recently, my wife was saying, Joel, like when I'm talking to you, like you're not listening. And she's right. I wasn't listening. I was getting ready to respond. I went back to my training that we did, and you talked about the 4 levels of listening. And guess what? These are the 4 levels of listening that when a client comes to me, that's how I should be listening to them. It's not that I'm ready to respond and give them an answer or give them a tactical tip like I'm asking you. It's really like just freaking listening. And I wrote down like on a to-do list for me just to remind myself, like, what am I going to do today? What's my intention? And it's active listening. And just now I really focus. And I noticed when my wife is talking, there's a lot of times my racy mind is going off and I've stopped. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm in my mind. I'm telling myself, just stop, Joel. Just look in her eyes and just listen. You don't need to respond. You have nothing to do. There's nothing to say. Just listen. That's been an interesting play for me in the last couple of months, for me to be connecting to presence in a little bit in that way. And so that's why I was thinking maybe that's the answer, but yeah, I don't know. Is there a practical tip that you would say for someone if they're looking to start creating and cultivating presence in their life?
Well, I think you gave one already, which is fantastic. That even if you can't do it every time, try, as you spoke about this thing about active listening, that rather than listening just to respond and just being, being in your own mental process. And, I'll often talk, say, well, where I want to respond from is usually my favorite topic, me, that, and, because it's true though. I don't know whether it is for you. It is for me,
It is for me. Yeah.
like my wife will say something and I just want to say something. It's about me. If I really look at it, not always, but it's still, it can be. So here's where what we're talking about, where presence or mindfulness or something like that really makes a difference in that process, because it enables this capacity we call meta awareness. Meta meaning over or above, a sort of Greek prefix meaning over or above. And what it means is that we're kind of in the awareness, but actually meta awareness is sort of awareness of the awareness, so that we can be aware of the thought that's coming up. We can be aware that there's a racing mind, and what that enables us to do is to kind of go, check it. I'm going to stay listening to Joel, because that's actually what I'm doing here is I'm really trying to listen, well, in this interaction to you, and not be sort of formulating or remembering, I've got to say that or do this, or because, so often I think we all know those times where we might even say something, we think someone's listening to us and they ask us about something that's completely unrelated, so it's got nothing to do, like they haven't actually understood me, they're in their own world, So that's the first thing I would say is just really, start to become aware of what your internal mental process is like. What are the kinds of thoughts that are going on for you just in everyday life? That's part of mindfulness practice, mindfulness of the mind and mental phenomena. But when you're in an interaction, whether it's with your kid, your boss, your direct report at work, your wife, your whomever, your husband, just be with them. Try and just be with them. As you said, our little teddy bears, as I know one teacher will talk about it, put it down, turn it off. Try not to have all your notifications going. Man, isn't that something? You're trying to talk with someone, ding, ding, just be somewhere, just for the sake of being somewhere and
Wow.
not with everything else.
Yeah. So funny that you just mentioned the meta awareness, just being aware of being aware. And you're so right, because most people, even if they say to me, Joel, I want to be more present, or Rod, give me the practical tip. Well, the first starting point, like you just mentioned, is you're not even aware that you're aware that you're doing these actions.
Mm.
And a perfect example, my mom came in town to visit, and she'll be listening to this podcast. So this is great. But she'll ask me a question, and then as I'm responding, ask me two different questions about completely other subjects. And my brother and I were talking to her and said, Mom, have you noticed you've been doing this a lot? You start to do that. You listen to videos at 1.5 to 2x speed to consume a lot. You become a consumer of information since she's retired. And she's not, and as you just said that, I just realized. And so we actually confronted her about it and said, maybe you should like stop doing that. And actually, when you ask a question, like just ask that question and be with it. And in my head, it's like we tell her a lot, like, hey, you just cut me off. Hey, you just cut me off. She doesn't even realize she's doing it. And so we kind of had to sit down and kind of reminded her again, like, maybe you should stop doing these things. Maybe you should go on a detox of your laptop and phone for a week and just see what that's like. But you're right. If you're not even aware, then why would you change in the first place?
Well, that's right. You've got to have some awareness of it, haven't you? This is actually, and yet, what we're actually how we're actually reactively, responding to all of these things, is what we would call just conditioned processes. This is, the way that we've kind of the habit patterns of the mind, the way we've forced ourselves, not forced, we've trained ourselves to become, in a sense. And then what we do is we kind of have this trick where we think every thought that comes in, every reactive response that comes in is me. And that I'm even making a decision around this. Well, the decision's made way upstream. That happened back in the CEO's office, way in the background there. And the only way we start to question that, the only way we start to change those things, is to begin to become aware of them. And that is a faculty of mindfulness. It's just to start to, that's one of the things we one of the main things we do. Like if you go on retreats or any kind of version of mindfulness, is really the instruction is to explore your mind. And how we explore it is by what is it telling us to do? What are the impulses it creates in us? What are those? Just get curious in them. Don't judge them. Don't be hard on yourself because you have things, or, I don't know about you as well. There are sometimes thoughts that come in my mind. I think, oh, where did that come from? Man, no, and I'm not going to take it personally. I'm not a bad person. There are all sorts of reasons why, these things occur. I just get curious in them. And I certainly don't act on them if they're unwise or unskillful or, not going to lead to good outcomes. That's what mindfulness gives, is that, that everyone must, well, I guess many people probably know this, that great saying of Viktor Frankl's, the meaning guy, about, between stimulus and response, there is a space. I'm sort of paraphrasing that. Well, mindfulness gives you the opportunity for that pause.
Yeah. So good. Man, I want to talk to you about a little shift here and just talk about your Emergent Coach Training Program that you've created and kind of what sets it apart from all the other coaching programs out there. And then we can also talk a little bit about Rites of Passage. And I know I want to get into that with you as well. But yeah, talked about the Emergent Coach Training Program and just why it's so unique compared to everything else out there.
Well, yeah, this became my real love project. This became the thing that, because I'd been developing programs for other people for a long time. As you know, I'd done the very first Human Potential. I'd remade that. Then I came over and worked with Dave and Mark, and we did the what was the Bulletproof Coach Training Program, then remade into the Human Potential, and I was able to kind of implement more in there. But it was just time for me to really do what I wanted, where my heart really felt, really lay with these ways that we can work with other humans, that can be impactful on a whole other level. And so what I think is really is different from what I've seen in most other coach training programs and even experienced in myself, is that mostly what we're having, I'm going to get a little technical here, so what we kind of have two kind of processes. We know we have a sort of conscious workspace and what we call an unconscious workspace, and sort of cognitive scientists, or many scientists will also talk about them as the explicit workspace. It's the conscious explicit space and the implicit space, which is, and so cognitive science currently tells us, this sort of science of human decision making and thinking and so forth, currently tells us that at the very minimum, 95% of our cognitive processes are in that implicit workspace. They're not even in the space that you and I are communicating, having sentences and having, very impactful conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it's that explicit space where coaching is really happening. It kind of has to, because we communicate in sentences and so forth. But it's rarely impacting down on this other space. And yet that other space, as science tells us, is also shaping everything that happens. So it's this kind of area that got me very interesting. Okay, so how do we start working with that? So I started reading a lot. I've met with cognitive scientists and read a lot of papers, and there are people talking about how we can work with that. There's lots of different ways, and sort of reflective practices, mindfulness practices. Yogis know all about this. They sit very quietly and have these incredible insights that completely change their lives. But say in coaching, we don't have that luxury to go away and sit for 20 days with a client in silence and ask them a couple of Yoda-like questions, and suddenly the world opens. So how else can we get into that?
And
So
to
I
your
really
point, Rod, too, one of the big problems I have with some of the yogis, and we learn from them. Listen, I love this stuff,
sure,
but
yeah.
one of the things I always joke about is, yeah, well, that's great, Buddha. I'd love to see you with a family of 4 and married and be all the things. You were sitting in the wilderness on a rock meditating, 4 hours a day. Of course, you could think of all these things. Now put that in reality, right?
Yeah.
You just said.
Well, to just add something onto that, the Buddha left his family. He had a wife and child.
Yeah,
Right.
there you go.
Right.
And like some
So
of these gurus out there,
yeah.
I was just talking to this guy Sadhguru, who's very popular.
Yeah.
I was in a conversation with somebody the other day, and they said, "Oh yeah, like he left his wife. He was a terrible husband." So I mean,
Right.
and again, we can learn from these people the
We
good
can learn.
things. I always take
Yeah.
away the good stuff,
Yeah.
and I'm not here to judge them or blame. I could care less. But it's just to your point,
But
right?
yeah,
Like, hey, how do we it's one thing to say it and then another thing to embody it, which is what
that's
I
right.
said in the beginning. It's
Yeah.
one thing for Joel to learn about presence.
Yeah.
Now go out and do it with your family
That's
of
right.
2, being an
Yeah.
entrepreneur, podcaster, everything you do.
That's
Right?
right. Yeah. I think you're spot on with that. That yes, it is true that we have to show what we're I don't want to just say discussing, but these ideas have to be lived and embodied. They have to be a joined up reality and truth. Not to say we're perfect as humans, but we at least need to show this in the way we are. So with emergent coaching, we definitely teach the sort of core coaching skills. I don't want to say that the not working with working with the explicit space of our cognitive process is in any way lacking impact. It's incredibly impactful, and we know that. But what I'm curious about is these other ways, and the sort of nexus of getting into this other part of our consciousness is the body. So there's a lot to do with embodiment, and actually cognitive science at the moment is deeply curious about that. They have these areas called embodied cognition, theories of embodied mind, and so forth. And what we there are all these there's areas known as enacted environmental cognition, and those areas, they're informing a lot of AI and robotics, because AI and robotics are trying to understand how do humans think, how do they make decisions, there's incredible research coming out of that showing us that people can that decisions, very complex decisions and problem solving, can be done without any of the kind of normal ways that we think of as problem solving. Like, we take concepts in, we move them around in there, 2 and 2 equals blah, and take away something, and then we spit it out as a sort of action. Well, the body is often doing this without any recourse to that whatsoever. That's what environmental and enacted cognition has shown us. So there's incredible stuff. so some of the ways that I've introduced into the program are ways of working with the body that aren't also weird. There's something that you could do in a Zoom call with someone. There are different ways of just asking and working with a client, asking questions with a client. There is a process called focusing that I've done professional training in. I've qualified as a teacher of, and I've introduced that into our program. And focusing is not many people. It's really weird. The guy who invented it is a chap called Eugene Gendlin. He was a professor at Chicago University. He was the research director for Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers is one of the, alongside Abraham Maslow and those sort of people, one of the biggest names in humanistic psychology. He founded person-centered psychotherapy.
Oh, wow.
And focusing, they did this huge study of, what caused people to change when they're having conversations, with therapeutic conversations, with coaching, not that different. And they found out, they discovered what the traits were. And Gendlin turned it into this thing called focusing. It's an amazing process. So we're really the first coach training program that's integrated, And then the other part that I think I got very interested in was around the Rites of Passage thing. And it came out of doing my wilderness work, and what happened on that. And I was really transformed. It was really. So we do a 5-day retreat at the end of our program, and I take people. We have this retreat center in North Georgia, and we're not sitting in the wilderness for 5 days, so I don't do that. But we do a lot of work where we're interacting with the natural world in very, very interesting ways, in ways that anyone who's spent real time out in the world, you start to realize that that the whole planet is speaking to us in different ways. And indigenous communities, like native and traditional communities, all know this. But we fancy moderns, we got smartphones and everything. We forgot about all of that, and we kind of lost those languages. And it's something in all of that that's very curious to me, that how we bring it into coaching. And I think we figured out how to do that.
Wow. That's massive. I told you I went on a 5-day retreat with my son. It was a father-son. It was super, super powerful. And I remember the instructor talking about there'd be times where we would do what's called a sit spot. We would just go out into wilderness and just sit for 20 minutes and just look and observe. And it was so powerful. Talk about presence. But there were no phones at all. My phone was dead, and I was part of the requirement was you're not allowed to look at it, which was really cool. And I just remember throughout those sit spots and just connecting with nature, one is that nature will give you back whatever you also give to it. And there's this symbiotic relationship that I know I've lost, and I'm sure many of us have, because we're just busy doing our normal life, the racy mind, like I said, go from schedule to schedule. But nature, when you're just sitting there, it's just so beautiful because it will give you whatever you need. And there's a symbiotic relationship. That's number one. Number two, you can really, like you said, there's this connection piece that what I found is nature, just sitting in nature. You want to be present, like we're talking about. Nature is like the best way to do that. It's one of the best ways. And I didn't realize that until going on that trip. And then I would say there's one other piece that I was thinking about, and I just lost my train of thought when it comes to this being in nature and why it's so powerful, I think, for us, and why we've lost that connection. But I mean, I think those are probably all the things that you're teaching. And I think what a cool way is, okay, now that you know that, Joel, and now that Rod understands that and much more, and he's teaching his coaches, how do we bring that back, like you said, and integrate it in the coaching in the coaching conversations and for our clients, so that we can make sure that, hey, this isn't just a one-time 5-day thing. I learned some cool things. I walked on some hot coals. I feel like I can go and conquer the world. Like, no, how do we go back and, like we talked about, embody it in our daily lives? That's the neat part that you're doing.
Yeah. So something about, I think that's very interesting about the whole business about humans and the natural world is, somehow we see ourselves as apart from it. We either own it, it's for our purposes, it's, or we live in these nice, comfortable homes, and the nature thing is out there. And yet study after study continues to show us that any kind of interaction with natural environments of any kind, the Shinrin-yoku, the forest bathing, listening to bird sounds. There's just study after study after study shows that they have incredible benefits for human health, for human psychology. That when humans are in these environments, they radically alter. And I would, they often get shown as some kind of curious hack, like go and get 5 minutes out there, and listen to a bit of bird song and come back in and everything will be great. Now, I see it as a little bit sad, really. I think what it's indicating is what it means when we're ripped out of where we belong. There's something that's something that's been dislocated that needs to go back into it in order to sort of really awaken and come alive. So there's something of that. But equally, I think it has some implications for us even in coaching. So I do these workshops for the International Coaching Federation on the impact of ritual and environment in coaching and how we can set those up without being weird, not being, that we could have backgrounds, for example, with natural environments. We can invite people to go out and look out the window. Even just looking at images of the natural world has profound impacts on human psychology and human biology.
Wow.
So we can use all of these. One thing I do with I have this little thing I do with clients sometimes is I'll say, I've got a couple of images. Would you be okay if we throw them up and put maybe an image, and I have one that's got like a stag and an owl and a rabbit, these sort of natural, and I just say, just get a sense of which one, where you want to go. Or one might be a beautiful valley, another's a river, another's an ocean. And just looking at it, the client's nervous system starts to change, their executive function shifts in really curious ways. And then we use that as a sort of proxy, as a way in to kind of have discussions about what they're talking about, whether it's this argument with their boss or, how I'm going to, find a new job or something. But we use this kind of natural world proxy, as a way to talk about it. And I'm also aware it's having an impact on their nervous system. So there's very interesting ways we can do this.
Yeah. Wow. I just remembered the last thing I was going to tell you is that what I learned from the teachers, there's no accident with nature. And so like if a hawk flies overhead or something, like that's a sign. Like if a rabbit if a rabbit or something were to cross our path, he would say things like, just so you guys know, like rabbits don't usually come in this direction. So take that for what it is. You might be getting a signal from nature. There's no accidents. There's no coincidence. And I like that aspect too. There's so much we can learn, like you said, from nature.
I did a training with this amazing guy who runs this thing called School of Myth. Someone called Martin Shaw is over in the edge of Dartmoor in England, and Shaw has this really interesting view. He even says myth is the earth. That he said the difference between a myth and a fairy story is you can't trace the origins of a myth. And he said his view is that the myth is actually the earth speaking to us. I know it's kind of very, really brings something alive in me when I hear that, because myths have all of these elements of the natural world that speak to us. That that it's really true. My wife is from the Northern Carpathians in Central Europe, and they still, a lot of people in her country still have this kind of view that things are. That parts of the earth are still speaking to them. Mm-hmm. They get guided by that.
Yeah, it's funny. I just interviewed someone who was a top interior designer in New York, and she works with the 1%. And in her book, she talks about these myths actually being truths. And when I think to what you're speaking of, when you go back in time, they were actually truths. They weren't myths. And really interesting stuff.
Well, we can always hear ourselves in those stories. That's what Campbell was talking about with the hero's journey. He said, look, all of these tales, whether it's a woman, whether it's a man, the protagonist, the sort of hero, is taking this journey, these great mythic journeys, whether it's the Buddha's story, Luke Skywalker, whomever it is.
Yeah. I know we have to wrap things up here, but I wanted to just ask you one last part about the rites of passage. And just because I'm raising two young boys, and it's become more evident to me, like as we get in this more comfortable world, having rites of passages is really important. And I'm just curious your take on that, or even just maybe for young children, but
Yeah.
also wanting to be, I want to raise these to be strong men too,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
also just in the aspect of rites of passage, to
Yep.
your point with the people that you work with. I'm sure there's a lot of
Yeah.
CEOs and executives that have had a pretty comfortable life. They haven't had to go through any, I
That's
don't want to
right.
say creating a business is not, that's hard work,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you know what I mean? They haven't been maybe
Yeah. Yeah.
pushed out of their comfort zone physically
No, that's
or
right.
even emotionally.
Yep.
And these rites of passage can be like kind of the gateway, I think, to
Mm-hmm.
really challenging us and pushing us out of our comfort zone, pushing us to the edge. And that's something that we probably, a lot of us need more than ever. So yeah.
Well, there's actually, yeah, there's a lot of commentators on this about how we in the West, when we separated, they talk about this journey from forest to town, going from traditional society structures to these very modern structures that we have, that we have lost that thing of the rites of passage. I mean, we sort of have them. You see them in the quinceañera, is it? Or the, weddings and these kind of things. They are a form of rites of passage in some ways. But these really transitional moments in our life, that we are particularly moving from childhood to adulthood. That's one of the very, very classic kind of rites of passage periods, and there's something then when you have what I've spoken about often as uninitiated humans, people who didn't have that, that this is, there's a lot of commentators saying this is why we're so lost. That chap I was talking about, Martin Shaw, he for decades ran rites of passage in the Welsh Hills, you know, for taking people through these transitional moments in their life, because these were adults, but they were lost. They didn't have that formative period, outside of the family, that they could transition, they could grow, they could develop. And I do think I have written a paper about this where I think actually coaching itself can be viewed that way, that would, depending on your coach. But, I really like to work with someone, and, I don't come in and say, hey, you're in a rites of passage. I'm your guy. I'll be your guide, by the way. So, buckle up and here we go,
20
but
push-ups. Let's
I'm,
go.
well, yeah, but it's in my
Toughen up.
mind, because
Yeah.
rites of passage are characterized by a letting go, a willingness to let you hear the call, you let go. You go into a place of what they call liminality. You spend a lot of time in liminality, and liminality is the space where things are neither this nor that. They're forming. It's when Luke goes down into the cave after he, you see it in a lot of these. When the Buddha had it, when he left his home and he moved out and spent years out there, practicing, wandering around, not sure what he was going to do. And then we reincorporate. Then we something's happened. We've had an insight. We've changed, and we reincorporate, and we go back into what looks like the same life, but we're different.
That's so good. And I just think from my background being in police, and I know the military, the same thing. I just thought about it like, wow, there's rites of passages where they actually the whole goal is to break people down, to
Yep.
build them back up. They come back, and like you said, the same environment, but they're a different person.
But you're different.
And they operate
You've
different.
changed.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And it makes so much sense. So yeah. Wow. I got to bring you back on because there's so much more I can talk to you about. Maybe
I
I'll
love
just bring you
talking
back
to you,
on
Joe.
like every 3 months or something. There's so many good nuggets here, man. Rod Francis, just thank you for being on the show. But before we wrap up, tell everybody where they can connect with you on either social or just your website. Where can they learn more about all the cool things that you're up to?
Well, the program is called the Emergent Coach Training Program. So if they're looking for that, it's a kind of odd name for a company. It's called Interactualizer. So that's the name of that. That might be a little hard, but it's Inter and then Actualizer. There's kind of reasons for that. So that's where my program's hosted. And also, if they're just looking for me, it's rodfranciscoaching.com. Real easy.
Yeah. Easy stuff, man. Are you on are you on Instagram? I know you're on LinkedIn a lot, but if somebody else wants to kind of follow your research and just all the things you're up to, is LinkedIn probably the best spot?
LinkedIn's the best spot for me, and also that's probably the best spot. And we have an Instagram which is interactualizer.com, at interactualizer. But if they're just wanting to follow me, yeah, LinkedIn's a great place to just catch me, and you can usually find out what my other things, the other projects I'm doing from there.
Yeah. Awesome. Rod, thanks for being on the show, brother. Appreciate you.
Thanks so much, Joel.